All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for hopping on this webinar for the Waterfront Adaptation Plan. My name is Timmy Bolton, Senior Climate Adaptation Analyst and Project Manager for this work effort. Before we get going, I'd like to introduce our Outreach Coordinator, Joao, who will say a couple words for any Spanish speakers we have joining us today.
Buenas tardes. Hay servicio de traducción disponible. Si desea escuchar nuestra presentación en español, por favor, utilice la función levantar la mano o raise your hand de Zoom o use el chat Q&A para enviar un mensaje a los organizadores. Una vez se comience la presentación, se le pedirá que seleccione la opción de interpretación.
All right, thanks, Joao. So on today's agenda, we have two primary items. The first is a presentation. It's about 30 minutes long, where I'll set the context for how this project fits into the city's overall program to address hazards. I'll then run through our current understanding of current and future coastal hazard risks along the waterfront, and then run through some potential options we're considering carrying forward in the process to study further, as well as highlighting some key next steps. We'll then have a Q&A period that will hold until about 1 p.m. For any questions that you have, please include those in the chat following the on-screen instructions here by clicking the QA button and submitting that in the side panel. So Santa Barbara is unique as a city in that we have a dedicated adaptation and resilience program with 3 full-time staff whose purpose is to work collaboratively with teams throughout the city organization to help our community prepare for current and future climate-related hazards like sea level rise, flooding, erosion, and wildfires. We're actively working on several major work efforts as shown on this slide here, which are primarily the highest priority implementation items from the city's 2021 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan that took a comprehensive look at sea level rise for our entire city for about the next 100 years or so. This includes doing a regional coastal monitoring program with our partners at Beacon. It includes preparing our wastewater and water infrastructure for all climate hazards. It includes improving the resiliency of flooding in the Laguna watershed from rain events, as well as doing a climate adaptation plan project at the airport. Our other major work effort is the focus of the presentation today, which is the Waterfront Adaptation Plan. It's funded by the California Coastal Commission, the California Coastal Conservancy, as well as the city. We're fortunate to have an extremely strong team working on this project today. It's headed by the Sustainability and Resilience Department and supported by quite a number of other folks throughout the city organization, including several on the team who are here to answer your questions today. We're also fortunate to have an extremely strong consultant team supporting this work effort, headed by Stantec, supported by Bionic, ESA, Coastal Restoration Consultants, as well as Summit Environmental, who are helping do the technical work and will be drafting the eventual plan. Our guiding light and vision for this work effort is to develop practical solutions to address coastal flooding and coastal erosion for at least the next 30 years while enhancing beach access, recreation, boating, and habitat. This is about a 3-year work effort, and we find ourselves pretty close to the middle here. We completed some initial community engagement in the early portion of last year and did a big effort to do new technical modeling and analysis to better understand what's at risk today and what will be at risk in the future with continued sea level rise. We're now at the exciting juncture where we're starting to talk about solutions and bring pen to paper to get some initial ideas on how we can address those types of hazards. I really want to emphasize that we're truly at the beginning of about a year-long process to build towards an ultimate recommended approach and solution, which will be included in a public draft plan about a year from now. We're really trying to whittle down the big spectrum of the things that we could do to a smaller suite of options that will do a follow-on technical analysis, better understand feasibility, effectiveness, timing, and cost. Our focus area for this work effort is shown here. It's the 3-mile coastal portion of our city that spans from Ledbetter Beach to the Clark Estate. It's one of the city's most valued public assets, supporting beaches, parks, the working harbor, fishing, tourism, and it really serves as one of the cornerstones of our local economy, with about $100 million in recreational value, and it plays a big part in the county's $7.7 billion blue economy, as well as the $2.2 billion South Coast tourism market. Because of its location, elevation, it's a place that's particularly vulnerable to coastal flooding, coastal storms, and coastal erosion. The waterfront has a shoreline that has only ever told one consistent story, and that is ever changing. From the thousands of years that the Chumash lived along a naturally shifting coastline of dunes, wetlands, and beaches that was naturally reshaped by winter storms and currents, to the creation of Stearns Wharf in 1872 that fixed a point on an otherwise ambulatory coast and created a permanent industrial edge that spurned year-round use to our waterfront. The shoreline was forever changed when the harbor was built, which trapped sand that would otherwise move with currents down the coast and has created the beaches as we know them today. We now find ourselves at that next major inflection point when we must take deliberate action to address the impacts we faced during recent storms and the challenges we anticipate to see in the future with continued sea level rise to save our sandy beaches, to protect our harbor, and to protect our inland areas. For the purposes of this project, we are primarily focused on two broad categories of hazard impacts. The first is the area where waves are actively crashing and causing damage, and the second is the inland flooding that occurs from the ocean. Today, we are experiencing both types of those broad categories of hazard impacts as shown on the slide here. We've experienced big waves bashing against our infrastructure. We've experienced our parking lots collapsing into the ocean. We've separately experienced those parking lots getting flooded from the ocean and covered in sand, as well as flooding in the harbor commercial area itself, which has disrupted our operations. At the end of the day, it's truly not sustainable for us as a city to spend $3 million in cleanup and repair costs from a single large coastal storm like we did in 2023, which is one of the core reasons why we're doing this work effort. As part of this project, we took a deep dive to see how our shoreline has evolved over time, and what we found matched our anecdotal experience, which is that East Beach has been eroding significantly. Relative to the year 2000, each year East Beach on average has been eroding about 5 feet, which is a significant amount. This graphic in the middle shows East Beach during a king tide event this past November. And during that high water level condition, we see that the ocean was right up to the ice plant and in some cases spilled up and over onto the bike path. This is important because over time, as the shoreline has migrated inland as its beach has eroded, not only have we lost access to the recreational component of a sandy beach area, but as that shoreline has moved inland, so too has the risk of hazard impacts to the area around that. So what we mean by that is that the right portion of this graphic is far more likely to flood from the ocean today than certainly it was 20, 25 years ago. Thankfully, there are different dynamics along our coast, and during the same time period of analysis, Ledbetter was a generally stable beach, and West Beach actually grew slightly during the same period. When we look forward in time, we see that our risk profile will evolve and our challenges will only grow with continued sea level rise. As a quick data point, we've experienced 3 to 4 inches of local sea level rise relative to the year 2000 based on our local buoys. And we anticipate that that value and rate of rise will only accelerate in the coming years, which will create quite the challenge. Before we dive into the waterfront, I want to take a quick moment to really zoom out and focus on the context of how the waterfront fits into our overall city and region. And what we see is about half our city and most of the region have beaches that have inland coastal bluffs, like shown here at Henry's Beach. This is important because over time, as sea levels continue to rise, the shoreline will continue to get squeezed out as that shoreline marches inland, making access to dry sandy beach less and less with more and more tidal conditions over time. This will increase the importance of and the demand for our low-lying waterfront beaches, which is a core reason why during this project, we are really trying to focus on preserving and maintaining that sandy beach experience along our waterfront area for as long as possible. Shifting now into the waterfront itself, this and the following slide show the future position of our shoreline with sea level rise. These assume that all of our existing infrastructure remains, all of those historic processes remained, and all the current management decisions continue, including dredging at the harbor. What's new is the addition of sea level rise on top of those historic and current processes. The green line, the one closest to the ocean, represents 0.8 foot of sea level rise, or the shoreline in about the year 2050. The middle line in red is 1.6 foot of sea level rise, or the year 2065. And that inlandmost line in blue represents 2.5 feet of sea level rise, or the shoreline position in about the year 2075. And what we see first at Ledbetter, and then we'll work our way east, is that within the next 50 years or so, we could essentially lose a good portion of the sandy beach area along Ledbetter, with it essentially lost in front of the harbor commercial area and faring a little bit better in front of Shoreline Cafe and the Ledbetter picnic areas. Looking at West Beach, we see that it too begins to have some erosion, but that it remains wide and sandy. And it also remains wide and sandy well beyond the 30-year focus of this work effort, which really creates this profound opportunity to really focus on West Beach as a sandy beach destination. This is important, especially in the context of East Beach. As I mentioned, we have this challenging historic erosion condition. And when you add sea level rise on top of that historic challenge, that challenge only grows. Based on our analysis, essentially the good portion of the sandy beach area could be lost by about the year 2065. And at some point between 2065 and 2075, this entire area could erode all the way back to Cabrillo Boulevard, which creates quite the challenge. If we take a moment to really hone in and focus on the flood risk side of things, again, flooding from the ocean, we see that even today, our inland areas are at risk of flooding during really big storms. That far left graphic represents our current risk. The dark teal is the current high tide condition. The lighter teal is future high tide with sea level rise, and then those other colors represent different coastal storm conditions. And what we see is that today, when we have a really big coastal storm, Cabrillo Boulevard and some of the areas just on the other side of it are already at risk of flooding from the ocean. Over time, with continued sea level rise, the extent and magnitude of that risk only grows. The point here is to really emphasize that we need some sort of vertical protective measure, something raised above grade to prevent water from the ocean from flooding our lower downtown, our inland areas, and our inland neighborhoods. So while I want to emphasize that we certainly have a challenge on our hands, it's truly not all doom and gloom, and there is a toolbox of proven solutions. We often get asked, hey, can't you just put in a continuous seawall or rock revetment along the entire waterfront and call it good? And to a certain extent, we could. These types of hard engineered solutions do a pretty good job of protecting what's directly behind them. The massive trade-off, though, is that because they're hard structures, what happens is that you have waves coming in, bringing energy with it, and those waves hit against these hard structures and then redirect that energy to the soft sand around it. The byproduct is that it can erode those beaches around them and narrow the beaches far faster than if we didn't have those hard structures there at all. So if we have this high level goal to really preserve the sandy beach experience, this as a widespread solution can be counterproductive to that ultimate goal. That being said, they can make sense when in certain locations when you have critical infrastructure like the harbor that can't be easily moved. Beach nourishment, sandberms, and dunes are softer solutions that either mimic or restore natural processes as part of nature-based approaches to help widen our beaches. We do some of these things today, including using seasonal sandberms. Their primary Achilles heel, though, is that if you have really big storms and big waves bashing against them, they can be quickly lost to sea or they can be pushed inland. One of those early photos that showed the Harbor West and Ledbetter parking lot areas covered in sand, that sand came from a seasonal sand berm that was previously located in front of that parking lot, had been hit with some big waves, and then was pushed into that parking lot. Because of that, they require regular maintenance as well as a sand source to create these and maintain these types of systems. Groins, headlands, and artificial reefs are another option within the toolbox. These are structures that extend perpendicular relative to the shoreline out to sea and can help widen the sandy beaches by trapping sand that would otherwise move with currents down the coast. Similar in a lot of ways to what our harbor does today. The primary trade-off with these types of approaches, though, is that because they trap sand, they can create downcoast impacts and starve the downcoast beaches of sand. This can create significant political and legal liabilities and also makes them challenging to permit. These types of approaches require an expense both to install them, but also an expense to maintain them over time, as well as an external sand supply from the system to ensure that they are always full of sand and not creating those downcoast impacts. Fundamentally, relocation or removal of development has to be a part of the conversation if we're prioritizing the sandy beach experience. Fundamentally, it's a great way to take assets and infrastructure that's currently in a risky hazard area and moving them out of that risky hazard area to address that risk. The challenge and trade-offs come, though, in that some things aren't easy to move, like the harbor. Some things don't have replacement sites available for them. And you also have to consider impacts to uses, revenues, and existing leases when we're talking about moving existing businesses or existing revenue generating assets to consider how we will continue to fund, maintain the waterfront, as well as to pay for some of these infrastructure improvements. I know I've talked a lot about coastal hazards, but I want to emphasize that we are really taking a holistic approach to this project. If we're going to really do this massive infrastructure investment to our waterfront area, why not also do it in a way that improves the experience for all of our users? So the ideas represented on this slide are all things that we heard during our initial community engagement campaign when we said, hey, what do you love about the waterfront and what could we do better on? A key thing we heard is that there needs to be a safe way to walk and bike throughout our entire project area. There's some notable gaps in the network today, namely in the Harbor West and Ledbetter parking lot area, as shown in that top left graphic, where you have the situation where a lot of our users are walking and biking through a parking lot where we don't have separated space for them, and you have that potential conflict with folks driving cars in that area. So that's one thing we plan to address through this project. West Beach is challenged today by how the storm drain system operates. You have this issue where the storm drains outfall below the ultimate level of the sand, which creates this pooling and compaction issue shown in that middle photo. So that's something we plan to address and really reimagine this space. There are certainly great moments and places along the waterfront, but there are also some spaces that aren't necessarily as connected or as welcoming as they could be. So this is the theme you'll see embedded in some of these ideas later to really improve the urban design experience for all of our users. We've heard clear demand for additional facilities, everything from boat storage to bathrooms, so you'll see that included. And we also see a clear need to really enhance economic vitality, both to support our local economy, but also to look for ways to generate revenues to hopefully help fund some of these infrastructure improvements. And finally, there's a rich history of recreational activity along our waterfront. We want to celebrate that. We want that to continue forward for as long as possible. As we start to talk about solutions, we are primarily prioritizing those that are multi-benefit. So what we mean by that is an example here is if, okay, we're going to add some new transportation infrastructure to make it safer to walk and bike in the Harbor West and Ledbetter parking lot areas. Why not design that infrastructure in a way that also addresses the hazard risk and the hazard impacts we've been experiencing in that same area? So one idea you'll see that'll come up quite a bit in the remaining of this presentation is this idea of doing an elevated walking and biking path. This would be raised above the adjacent grades, provide that safe transportation function with separate space for each of our users. It could include adjacent planted areas, park areas, relocated facilities, bathrooms, that type of thing, and include stairs and ramps down to the beach and adjacent areas around it. But it could also include that raise component, which provide that vertical element required to prevent our inland areas from being flooded from the ocean when we have big storms and high water levels. So taking this all into consideration and pulling together a preliminary list of things that we're considering studying further in the next project phase to ultimately build towards a recommended solution and approach. We have 4 primary goals as shown here. It's really first and foremost all about saving that sandy beach experience and enhancing recreation for as long as we can. It's protecting the commercial working harbor in place, boating and all of its coastal dependent uses. It's protecting our inland areas for flooding from the ocean, and it's providing a safe and separated way for our folks to walk throughout the entire project area and portion of the waterfront, ideally designed in a way that also provides that flood protection component. For this project, we primarily envision 3 types of projects. The first are the so-called quick wins. These are the low-hanging fruit, lower cost, just do it type projects that can largely be accomplished with existing city budgets. These are things like restriping parking lots, minor drainage improvements, and using temporary flood walls when we have storms to provide some flood protection. These are things that we would begin doing as soon as the plan's adopted. The so-called core measures are really the bread and butter focus of this work effort. They're the things that provide comprehensive and holistic hazard protection for at least the next 30 years or so, the focus of this work effort, things like that elevated walking and biking path. We're also considering so-called future options. These are things that aren't necessarily required for the types of hazards we anticipate seeing over the next 30 years or so, but are things that could be required later in time, or are things that fundamentally change the physical dynamics of the coast, things like groins, things like headlands. The way we see these projects coming together is that really the quick wins are stopgap measures while we work on funding, permitting, and ultimately constructing those core measure projects, which we would begin working on immediately after plan adoption, and would be required regardless of which future options we ultimately consider. So diving into it, starting first at Ledbetter Beach, and then we'll work our way east through the project area. The vision for this space is really all about a sandy beach and recreation destination. The quick wins here are intended to address the pressing safety and flooding fixes. From a safety standpoint, we really mean the transportation safety component. So exploring this idea of taking the edge of the paved area and restriping it in a manner similar you see in that top left graphic, where you have separate space for folks to walk and bike. Also exploring the use of temporary deployable floodproofing measures in front of Shoreline Cafe, as well as the Ledbetter restroom. Exploring the use of a low curb wall at the edge of the paved area to provide that protection and prevent it from undermining and collapsing into the ocean, like we showed in one of those early graphics. And because there's the potential to displace some parking by providing that new restriped area to walk and bike, we're exploring capturing some unused space that's adjacent to shoreline when it comes down the hill. There's a unused space really between the roadway there and that parking lot. And so we think by expanding that parking lot a bit, we can capture some additional parking spaces over there and in balance end up with more or less the same that we currently have today. The core measures are really all about this idea of saving the sandy beach by strategically moving things inland over time. Exploring the idea of taking area that's currently park, converting that to sandy beach, taking the area behind that, converting that to a park-like area that could also include space for relocated facilities and assets. And then behind that, have the elevated walking and biking path to provide that safe transportation function, as well as that ultimate backstop when you have big storms, when you have high water levels to provide that inland flooding protection. I do want to mention that when we're talking about strategic relocation, these things can be done in phases or based on triggers. So as an example, Shoreline Cafe or the Ledbetter restroom could be relocated when we have replacement facilities available or when we reach specific thresholds on the ground, like when they're no longer safe to operate and use. As part of this exercise, there's the potential to impact some existing parking within this area by strategically moving things inland. So we're exploring opportunities to provide replacement parking outside of the hazard area on the north side of Shoreline Drive. One idea is to convert some of those existing parking lots near Santa Barbara City College into new multi-story parking garages. Also exploring ideas to improve stormwater drainage in this area to address some of the existing challenges that we currently face. The potential future options are really an extension of the strategy of strategically moving things inland to provide space for the shoreline to naturally migrate inland over time and remain sandy. Things could be moved in further. The walking and biking path could be raised higher to provide protection from bigger storms. And I also want to mention on this graphic and all the other graphics where you see this green area, that could be a lot of different things. It could include park area, it could include space for relocated assets. It would all include public restrooms and things like that. What's new in this concept is the idea of exploring a potential headland at the edge of the harbor breakwater area that you'll see in the next section, as a means to both provide some additional hazard protection to this area, as well as a means to also widen the sandy beach for a bit longer. Shifting now to the harbor, where the vision is really all about a commercial fishing, recreation, and public access destination. The quick wins here are quite similar to that at Ledbetter. It's exploring deployable floodproofing measures to protect key assets when we have storms. It's doing minor drainage improvements in the harbor commercial area itself, and it's continuing that restriped area to provide that space for our users to walk and bike. The potential core measures are all about flood protection while prioritizing public access and boating. The big move here is exploring this idea of a new raised rock revetment in front of the entire harbor commercial area that would connect from the edge of the breakwater around the entire harbor commercial area and then connect to the area behind it. This would provide hazard protection for the boating and coastal dependent uses and everything behind it. This could include a new pedestrian promenade on top of it to provide a much better connection for our users coming from Ledbetter and connecting it to the harbor breakwater itself, as well as to provide 360 circulation for our users to be able to safely walk around the entire harbor commercial area. This could include stairs down to the sand, the beach, and the water. We know there's high demand for the limited space within the harbor commercial area itself. So as part of this exercise, we're also exploring methods to really improve public access and boating within that limited space. As with our other areas, exploring opportunities to both enhance and strategically raise the walking and biking path to improve public access and safety for our users, as well as to provide an ultimate backstop and flood protection component. Another idea is to look at ways to generate new revenue through this work effort to again support infrastructure improvements and ongoing maintenance and management. So one idea is to explore taking a portion of the harbor main parking lot and converting that to some other use. This could include shops, it could include boat facilities, it could include other things that could do some economic development, generate some revenues. The potential future options are really all about additional flood protection and additional hazard protection, exploring opportunities to raise all of the paths and edges higher to withstand bigger storms, higher water levels. This is where that idea of the headland is introduced as a potential method to provide some additional hazard protection and also widen the sandy beach area in front of the harbor commercial area itself. Also exploring different ideas on how we can protect the marina itself through a potential sand trap at the mouth of the harbor, as well as doing a wave screen in the bottom right hand portion of this graphic, provide some protection from big waves events. Shifting now to West Beach, the vision here is really all about making it a premier sandy beach destination. This is a relatively wide and stable sandy beach for a long, long time, so there's only one category of project that we're currently considering here, and its core measures really all to that end of premier sandy beach experience. The first thing we need to do is really address that stormwater challenge. One idea is to really consolidate all of those pipes so that they don't individually outfall pool and pond on West Beach. So we consolidate them and then relocate them and reroute them potentially to the base of Stearns Wharf or so, which should significantly improve the sand quality in this area. If we really want to lean into this idea of a sandy beach experience, a place you take your family for the day, we need to add some facilities to support that experience. So we're also looking at the opportunities to add restrooms, showers, a cafe, beach concessions, and similar amenities in and around this area, currently demarcated in that orange area in the bottom left portion of this graphic. As with our other areas, exploring opportunities to do that elevated walking and biking path to provide that last line of defense, protection from coastal hazards. This could also include a new adjacent park area. This could provide a much more welcoming and connected experience from our users traveling between the harbor commercial area to Stearns Wharf, Lower State Street, and the lower downtown. Also want to mention that we very much intend to retain space for our small boats, outriggers to malls, and other things that are currently being stored in West Beach, ideally in a more space-efficient means. And finally, East Beach. The vision here is quite similar to that at Ledbetter about preserving sandy beach and recreation destination for as long as we can. This area is certainly challenged, though, by that highly erosive condition, as we talked about earlier. That being said, the approach remains similar. It's taking area that's currently park, converting that to sandy beach, and then behind that, having that ultimate vertical backstop of the elevated walking and biking path to prevent our inland neighborhoods from being flooded from the ocean. The potential future options here, we run into this paradigm where we really can't move things back further. Things have been relocated and pulled back to Cabrillo Boulevard, and so the question becomes, are there mechanical engineered means that we can use to widen the sandy beach to provide that sandy beach experience for longer and some additional hazard protection? So as part of that, we're considering exploring groins, headlands, offshore reefs, and all the trade-offs that come with those types of solutions to provide that function. The elevated walking and biking path could be raised higher for bigger storms, more resilience. As with our other areas, exploring opportunities to provide additional coastal access parking, looking at existing surface lots, considering whether those could be multi-story. Demarcated here is the Garden Street lot at the corner of Cabrillo and Garden Street. And we've also earmarked some space for the outcome and results from the Laguna Flood Resilience Study that we're about to kick off to improve some resiliency in that watershed. So I realized that was a lot, and the question becomes, where do we go from here? We started doing community engagement in early March, kicked off at council, been to quite a number of city advisory bodies, boards and commissions, those types of things. Also been doing community events and pop-ups, was at Earth Day and did a pop-up along the waterfront, a bunch of A-frames out. We launched a community survey a couple weeks ago that we'd love to get your input on. We're doing direct Spanish speaking engagement via our partners at the Promotores Network. And we'll be concluding this outreach window Um, really by in early June or so, I believe it's June 4th, we'll be at Council Sustainability Committee to share what we heard from this process, from all of that input and the open houses like this one. We'll then spend the summer and the early portion of next year doing that follow-on technical analysis to analyze all of these different approaches, and with a goal of having a draft plan released about a year from now in spring 27 that will include a recommended approach, funding strategy, a defined implementation pathway, and recommendations about what we should do along our waterfront. We then have a goal of returning to City Council for final consideration and adoption by about the end of 2027. The best way for folks to get involved and to learn more is to visit our website. We have all of our materials up there, all of our presentations, some recordings, other materials and handouts. We also have our email list on there. Would encourage you to sign up for that to get project updates and learn more. We have a survey that is live that we'd love to get your input on. It's asked for questions about all of these ideas that we introduced today. Are we headed in the right direction? What could we do better on? When we have limited space, what should we prioritize? Questions of that nature. Always love to chat for anyone who has any ideas on how we can make this project as good as it can be. My contact info is shown on the bottom of the screen here. And if you have any formal written comments you'd like to submit, please also email those to me as well.